Hi everyone, this is Dragon GGY. This is the operator Hindsight for the Ave Mujica collab operator Togawa Sakiko. Before everything, this will be a rather quick one because as I'm recording this, it's less than 24 hours before I head home and be AFK for the Chinese New Year. So I have to make this episode as concise as possible, but at the same time, this will also be a good try to test out my changes to the series format. So let's get started. Togawa Sakiko, or just Saki, is a 6-star lord in the guard class. Trait of the archetype can launch range attacks that deal 80% of normal attack. She's part of the Ave Mujica faction, which is a very important element to her gameplay. So we start off with a new section called Operator Breakdown. In this part, the roles that an operator serves, their kit design elements, and key features are laid out using tags to help you better understand what they do. For Sakiko, she's a dominantly single target damage dealer that deals both physical and arts damage. Don't worry, we'll get into these elements and features as we go through her kit. Talent 1, attack continuously. Attack will create notes that pursue enemies. Notes disappear shortly after floating out of her attack range. For each note present on the field, Ave Mujica members will ignore 3% defense and 2% resistance up to 10 stacks. Talent 2, each attack will increase fever by 3. When an Ave Mujica member's range overlaps with this operator's own, their attack range is treated as extension of own attack range. Attack speed of operators in range, including herself, plus 12, 16 at potential 5. So then let's break down what the talents bring to her performance, starting off with her unique attack and targeting mechanic. There's a whole essay that I can write about this part, but I'll make it easy to digest as much as I can. Number 1, she attacks continuously by creating nodes even when there's no available target in range. This action does not share intervals with normal attacks, meaning that Sakiko can immediately do an active attack right after releasing a no target note if someone walks in range. The notes will cache the attack stat and attack scale when Sakiko creates them. So for example, the Lord trait works by creating a 100% note when it's created towards a target blocked by herself, otherwise the 80% is written instead. For the specific behavior pattern of notes, all you need to know is that there's 3 major states: free moving, homing, and post-impact, which is optional, and a bunch of properties that help to characterize their actions and will vary between skills. Here's a whole diagram that I think covered the entire behavior logic pretty well. You can pause and read the flowchart, or here are some important takeaways. They always have to free flight for a little bit before trying to hit targets. When there's no target, notes fly in an expanding, waving pattern in the effort to better find nearby enemies. When they find a target or create it with a target available, they will fly slightly differently than when it's wandering and stays track on that target unless that target becomes unavailable before they hit. The notes will decay 1 second after leaving a range, but the distance actually traveled will also be dependent on their speed. Notes will also despawn when Sakiko leaves the field if they do not have a target. That will also mean that nodes that have a target will never despawn and chase down the targets until the end of the world or the target. Overall, this is a very delicate design that helps to extend strike range and reserve damage for incoming enemies. The continuous attacks also count towards offensive recovery, which is the pattern for all Sakiko's 3 skills. Next, let's talk about Fever, a special resource meter much like Mana for Martial last year. It's capped at 450, shared by all the Ave Mujica members, shown here, and persists over a battle. It's indicated by a note meter in the lower right corner of a Mujica member and has blinking visual effects when it's full. When Fever is full, any Ave Mujica member activating skill will put all the members in skill for 20 seconds. Fever is emptied on activation. During Fever, they don't continue to generate Fever. SP recovery is also paused during Fever, and the SP bar becomes pink red to indicate the Fever progress. Skills that are already active will be paused and continue after Fever ends, including the skill that actually triggers the Fever. One can fail to respond to Fever if they are silenced, disarmed, or in necrosis burst, but will pick up the progress when the respective status is over. During Fever, the stage background music will temporarily change, with the vocal version playing when all 5 members are on the field. One important bit of info is that Sakiko will generate fever from landing attacks, not necessarily dealing actual damage, so that's different and more forgiving than the description. Fever, in short, provides higher skill coverage and team play possibilities that we're gonna explore later. For the damage quality that comes alongside the note mechanic, the note that deals damage is also valid for total defense or resistance ignore stat calculation. The skill that works with this talent the most is definitely skill 3 and certainly all other Mujica members to some extent. There's also a team attack speed buff that applies to not only Ave Mujica members, and it's multiple offers in one package for Sakiko herself. More existing notes at the same time, accumulate fever faster, and recycle skills faster. In fact, Sakiko has a lot of inherent attack speed, which we'll get to in modules. Finally, the range extension, her own skill 3 range expansion as well as the range expansion of all other Mujica members can participate in this feature. However, it doesn't further extend from another member's range, and each other member must have at least one tile overlapping with Sakiko to actually extend her range. This, combined with the notes being able to flow slightly beyond range or further with a homing target, Sakiko has potentially the biggest range possible as a melee unit. A bigger range also facilitates more spaces for more existing notes at the same time, which translates to higher ignores. Sakiko's module trait update attack speed plus 12 when there are 2 or more enemies in range. Upgrades go to talent 1, each node now translates to 5% defense and 2.5% resistance ignore up to 12 times. Additionally, starting from level 2, ranged attacks will no longer deal reduced damage while skill is active. Base effect matches with skill 3 and the talent 2 faction range mechanic very well. The base plus attribute also provides a total of 19 attack speed, which helps to increase skill 3's attack count from 22 to 26. Upgrades increases the max defense ignore from 30% to 60%, resistance ignore from 20% to 30%. For reference, against an enemy at 2000 defense and 50 resistance, Sakiko would deal 140.9% more damage at module level 3 than without a module, and that's what we mean when we say damage quality. Removing the range attack penalty in skill is also a feature that boosts final damage massively. Bit of a shame that most lords have that as a skill feature instead, but then this also applies to all her skills, and an immediately improvement of 20%. So overall, a damage improvement module, and a ridiculous one. The base improvement for skill 3 is 59.2% when most modules are averaging at 25. It gets higher as enemies' defensive stats grow, therefore, more precisely speaking, a damage quality plus quantity update. Level 3 is definitely recommended for all players. As long as you have her and use her, you should get level 3. Before skill recommendation, here's a little overview of the Ave Mujica members. The design trend is very easy to catch. All of them have range expansion features, that is to help Sakiko reach further. The usual picks for this matter is Uika and Umili. It's very easy to construct significant stride range with them, reaching afar, sideways, or even behind. It's just a Lego game, easy to use. Also, they all have multi-hit or high-frequency damage. This is to better take advantage of Sakiko's ignores, so these frequent damage hit light but hit true. Uika's talent also applies an extra damage instance for all damage dealt by Ave Mujica members if they are in her range, so the kit features are highly synergized, well designed. This is an overview table. Build priority should be from left to right. Sakiko is the core of the team obviously. If you mainly use skill 3 for the best damage, you should also look to build Muzumi and Uika. Muzumi is the fever generator in this team. Her skill 2 can contribute 2/3 of the fever progress. Uika is the healer, damage buff for the team. Muzumi generates fever by taking or doing damage to herself. Then Uika generates more by healing her back up. Uika's skill 2 is the more offensive option, but you may also want skill 1 for the longer healing and bigger range. Umili is the only crowd control and AoE option in the team, but usually used to AFK with Sakiko. For that purpose, you should want to build her skill 1. And finally, we have Nyamu, who's in a bit of an awkward situation. Realistically speaking, it's okay if you don't build her. Her team attack and fragile buff isn't that necessary compared to faster fevers. The best application would be halo dropping her during fever to smash some heads, but certainly the most optional member here. Now onto skills. My recommendation, skill 3 over skill 2 and skill 1. Skill 3 is a physical and arts hybrid. I'm talking about 1-to-1, high total damage, big range annihilation skill with weakness targeting and great buff potential. It can maximize the gain from her talent 2 ignores and provides immortality to Mujica members in fever. Skill 2 and Skill 1 are both AFK options. If you use her with the team or more specifically Umili, go with Skill 1. If you are not playing her with the team, go with Skill 2 instead. Skill 2 can actively switch between physical damage and arts damage, with the physical damage part providing the only AoE feature in her kit. Honestly, Skill 1 is only A- because it has great combo with Umili Skill 1, 4 great range plus AoE damage and crowd control. It's much worse on her own, so I'd never recommend it outside of the team. Skill 1 plays 8 notes. Each note will inflict arts damage equal to 100% of attack that gradually decreases to 5%, can store 2 charges, and skill will automatically activate once when charge reaches max. This is a 0/3 offensive recovery manual skill. Obviously, if you judge as a normal AFK skill, 12 to 16k cycle DPS isn't that standout, especially when this is a single target skill. For mechanics, the total scale of the 8 notes is 422%. The auto manual use on full stack will not trigger fever. Compared to auto attacks, the notes are fanned out in a fixed pattern. For the few initial tiles, they are more likely to hit enemies right in front instead of sideways, but after that, they'll start to spread further from each other and eventually homing onto different targets or despawning in different directions. 8 notes at once is a quick way to stack her ignore stacks, but it takes her a very long time to build up fever all by herself. During fever, this pseudo power strike skill will just repeat itself, which is pretty scary and can have very high coexisting notes at the same time. For applications, it's mostly used with Umili Skill 1, which will respond to other Mujica members using their skill, and Sakiko Skill 1 plays to that mechanic perfectly. Every 3.6 seconds, both skills are used simultaneously. This combo provides the AoE and crowd control that Sakiko lacks, while Umili benefits from the resistance ignore. Umili also gives Sakiko a super fortress attack range, a runway for the notes to fly to. This combo is very comparable with Ascalon plus perhaps Thorns or Logos. This is where you will realize the difference brought by the resistance ignore. If you don't build Umili, use skill 2 instead. But from a meta perspective, Pramonic's Altar isn't too far away, and she does a very similar job on her own. If you aren't starting for immediate AFK options, I'd say don't invest too much into this. Skill 2 can switch between playing piano and organ. Piano as the default has attack plus 110%, notes travel faster and will pierce enemies when it hits them. Organ has attack speed plus 140, notes will deal arts damage and travel slower. During fever, attacks become double hits with the current instrument. This is a 0/5 offensive recovery switch type skill. When using the skill, the range attack no longer does reduced damage effect from Module Y is always active, so you don't have to worry about that part. When activating the skill for fever, it only triggers fever but do not swap damage types. During fever, you also cannot switch damage types, so keep an eye out for that. I'm gonna skip the specifics of notes behavior, you can read the details for yourself. Basically, physical notes travel much faster, spreads wider to potentially catch sideways enemies, and linger further within the 1 second off range before they despawn. Arts notes instead travel much slower and spreads less. When we use this skill, we mostly use it for the physical part. It provides a high attack multiplier on deployment and can do AoE damage after hitting a target, which is the only reliable multi-target from Sakiko. In practice, you need to keep her distance from enemies because the movement configurations make it so that enemies close to Sakiko will cause the notes to turn back and fly in all sorts of awkward directions, and that basically defeats the purpose of enemy piercing. The arts damage part helps her deal with high defense enemies when she has to, although I wouldn't say it's very effective having lower DPS than Vina Victoria skill 2. It's more for building up fever faster with more frequent hits, abusable on easier enemies too. Just remember to switch back to physical damage before fever. So both skill 1 and skill 2 has the option to go emergency mode from AFK mode if you click for the fever, which is very neat and assuring. Still not gonna recommend both skills highly anymore as we look back with Prominix available now. Skill 3, attack range expands, attack using both piano and organ simultaneously, each creating 2 notes that deals 220% attack as physical and arts damage. The notes will target enemies with the highest resistance and defense respectively. During fever, Ave Mujica members will not retreat upon receiving lethal damage and will only be retreated after fever ends. This is a 34/42 25-second offensive recovery skill. As you can see from the stats, the skill deals up to 200,000 damage in 25 seconds, which is almost 8,000 DPS. For mechanics, the immortality effect is only effective during fever and has a lower priority than most similar effects, so Mutsumi as a doorkeeper will swap to a substitute normally when taking fatal damage, and additionally will reset the effect of Sakiko's skill when switching back from substitute to normal and does not retreat. The notes in this skill also fly slower than usual. This is again to better take advantage of the ignores. The notes are also more spread out to the sides without a target to better line up with her range expansion. But the spread isn't that wide, and if enemies are much more sideways, the notes will not consistently fly out and find them. For the defense and resistance ignore stacks, enemies about 3 tiles away from Sakiko will reliably create the 12-note condition. For closer enemies, the longer minimum free move time and slower fly time make room for a higher stack than you would expect, but then it will not be as much as roughly showcased in the diagram here. There's also randomness to it, so just remember the further the better. Now, it's important to play around fever when using this skill. Faster fever generation brings higher skill coverage. For Sakiko herself, she deals up to 104 hits in skill 3, so that's about 2/3 of the fever meter. But in practice, it's quite impossible to land all of the notes, and to make it more efficient, she'll need some help. And the best enabler for her is Monster. Monster provides attack speed buff, and like we said, Sakiko benefits from attack speed like no one else does in the game. The buff provides more ignore stacks by creating more existing notes, increases total damage, accelerates fever buildup, and gives her faster cycles. Monster also provides attack buff that multiplies with the attack scales in skill 3 and allows Sakiko to fill up the entire fever progress in one skill use. To better put things into perspective, here are some additional stats of Sakiko's damage when she spends 20 seconds in fever plus 25 seconds in skill, as well as 25 seconds skill with Monster's skill 2's buff. And clearly, Monster allows her to dish out the damage that she would do over 45 seconds in just 25 seconds. Other than Monster, Mutsumi also helps with the fever generation a lot. Her skill 2 is able to generate 300 plus fever reliably in one use over 15 seconds. The efficiency is high for sure. The problem for the duo would be who to trigger fever once it's up. So following that, I'll introduce 2 main trio combos to help maximize Sakiko's damage, that being Sakiko, Mutsumi, Monster, or Sakiko, Mutsumi, Uika. Both of them will allow Sakiko to do fever, skill, fever for back-to-back skill coverage of up to 65 seconds. Of course, you have to build up the fever meter beforehand. For using Monster, activate Sakiko's skill 3 to enter fever, then Monster skill 2 about 5 seconds into fever activation. This will allow the attack speed to cover Sakiko's normal skill 3 progress and help her build up fever again from that. By the end, activate Mutsumi's skill to enter fever again. When using Uika instead, just use Mutsumi's skill 2 after the first fever. Sakiko plus Mutsumi will be able to fill up the fever bar again, then use Uika's skill 2 to trigger fever. What may be counterintuitive is that the combo with Uika actually does more damage due to her talent, but with Monster, it's much better survival, especially to keep Mutsumi from entering her substitute, and better cycles overall. Overall skill 3 is a high total damage, single target, big range, high damage quality skill. It's overwhelmingly buff potent. Her mechanics deem that she benefits massively from attack and attack speed buffs. The skill works closely with the fever mechanic to further enhance skill uptime and total damage. Immortality ensures that the team stands to finish the 20-second damage output window no matter what. The some limitations are Fever, being a team play oriented element, is less spammable when using her outside of the team. Buffs can help her progress faster, but there's no one to trigger the effect until her next skill use. Physical and arts damage can also go to different enemies with its targeting mechanic, which isn't a bad thing to start with, but then sometimes we wanted to focus fire on a single target. In hindsight, Sakiko is a physical arts hybrid damage dealer specialized in single target takedown from range. She has high damage quality plus quantity. Her targeting and range mechanic prevents damage loss to a certain extent and extends her effective strike range. She has unique team play elements with the Ave Mujica team, and their fever mechanic gives her higher skill coverage. Notably, she's among the top 4 units that scales extremely well with buff. There are clear limitations to her though. When using solo, she utilizes the fever mechanic much worse, unlike Masio, whose mechanics are pretty much complete on her own. She's not as consistent against more targets, and most importantly, she doesn't have a single bit of survival and crowd control features in the kit, except for the immortality, which doesn't have high coverage. So she's a very typical glass cannon type of character. The rating system is now changed to only based on performance in the 6 months since their release. The adjustment is made because kit reiterations are happening much faster. Theory crafting can turn invalid even before a real test could come, so it would be more practical to evaluate based on what happened. Daily at 8 for Sakiko, or 7.5-ish to be precise. For newer players, skill 2 is an okay transition skill before getting all the destructive weapons, but unfortunately has to stick with the range penalty until year 2. All her supporting teammates can be acquired in the same banner. In AFK, you can opt between Team AFK with skill 1 or Solo AFK with skill 2. Personally, I think the Umili Sakiko skill 1 set is low-key underappreciated. But more realistically, Promonix Auto Skill 2 AFK in the future is just too dominant. So I'll lower my recommendation for Sakiko AFK, especially considering that she's viable, but not really game-changing in this race. For veteran players, the Mujica team play experience is really refreshing and unique. The mechanics play to one another really well. I recommend for that matter if you have the resources to build them. Sakiko is also the most legit physical and arts hybrid damage to date. Good addition to the arsenal. For advanced, I would also have her at 8, perhaps closer to 7.5 as well. In integrated strategies, attack speed, physical damage, arts damage, offensive recovery, all sorts of relics, she just scales with those buffs all too well. It's easy to get into position for her to deal astronomical damage. It's also viable to pick her 5-star teammates as well, which may be cost efficient, but of course requires adapting your playstyle to it and dedicated practice. A very deadly downside to her is her lack of survival ability compared to other popular guard picks, for example the 2 Liberators and Antelicia in IS-6. She doesn't do well against damage instance gimmicks. She's devastated by Talisman. She showed great performance since IS-6 Expansion 1 with Ending 4, which features 2 damage sponge enemies. But then, over time, she just declines with the meta changes leading up to Expansion 2. RA is actually the best place to play with her team shenanigans with all the high HP bosses, the best place to experiment with the trios we mentioned just now as well. And finally, a glance at the upcoming Stronghold Protocol Alliance. She isn't meta in it, but you can opt her in to make her a terminal damage unit once you assimilate her to a major alliance. If you don't get it, it's fine, try it out in 2 months. That's gonna be it for this episode. I'm skipping the future preview in this one due to time constraints. I hope this episode have been informative, and early happy Chinese New Year to all of you. Catch you guys in the next one. Bye bye.